Country music is known for some of its colorful, interesting lyrics. Wow, we have a nice crowd here this morning. It's good to see all these seats filled. Here are a few song titles for you. When the phone don't ring, you'll know it's me. I like this one. This was a Conway Twitty Loretta Lynn song, and I remember it. You're the reason our kids are so ugly. And then there's I'm so miserable without you. It's just like when I had you around. One sentimental country song popular a while back, you might remember, was called A Long Line of Love. It's about a young man who is getting married, and his sweetheart asks him if he thinks they can make it. And his answer is, yeah, because I come from a long line of love. And then the song talks about his parents' marriage and his grandparents' marriage, and at the end of each refrain it says, forever is in my heart and in my blood, I come from a long line of love. Friends, Jesus came from a long line of love. Our story today that Shelley just read for us begins with a family of four. The husband, Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their two sons, whose names were, I guess I didn't write them down here. The two sons, anyway. Like many families today, they were probably hard to read, so I just put them out. You know. Like many families today, this family was experiencing money problems. A famine had spread throughout their land, and food was very scarce. So Elimelech and Naomi packed up a little U-Haul, and away they went. They left to move to Moab, where they knew there would be more food. One day, not too long after that, Elimelech just died unexpectedly. By this time, both sons had found local women and were married. Then, both of the sons died. And all this happened in a very short period of time, it sounds like. Naomi was devastated because in those days there were no opportunities for women. None whatsoever. Naomi was left alone, all alone in this foreign country. All she had left were her two daughters-in-law. How would she survive? They were all three women. Her only option was to return to her hometown, she thought, and hope that there would be a place for her somewhere when she got there with her relatives. And so she and her daughters-in-law set out to go back to the land of Judah. As the three widows started their journey, it occurred to Naomi that it might be better if the daughters-in-law would stay there in their own country. So she encouraged them to do that, to go back to their mother's houses and to find new husbands and live a life in their country. They were still young, and they could have the security that having a husband back then provided. And so Naomi loved them, and she wanted them to be with her, but she also wanted them to have a happy life and to be happy. So she kissed them, the scriptures tell us, and the three women cried together. Ruth and Orpah were the daughters-in-law, and they wanted to stay with Naomi. They argued, but Naomi knew that if she took them back to her homeland, that they would not be accepted by her relatives because they were foreigners. And that's how it was in those days. The law was very clear about these things. No Moabite could enter the household of faith even after 10 generations. That's how the law went. If her daughters-in-law were to stay with her, they would never be accepted. So Naomi again encouraged them to stay there in their homeland. She told them that it was foolish for them to follow her. She said, do I still have sons in my womb that may become your husbands? And finally, Orpah decided that, you know what, Naomi, you're right. I think I will stay here. And so Ruth still wanted to stay with Naomi, even though Orpah was not going to. Ruth, you see, loved Naomi deeply. And Ruth spoke some of the most famous words ever written, words that are sometimes used in weddings, where we hear these words, where you go, I will go. Your people shall be my people. Your God, my God. The story of Ruth and Naomi is what love is all about. Not romantic love in this case, but love. Deep, deep, abiding love. It's about loyalty. It's about faithfulness. It's about a devotion to each other. A 3-year-old girl became very ill. She was so critically ill that she had to stay in the hospital for many months. And in all those months, her mother never once left her hospital bed. She stayed right there beside the bed. She was a little woman. She weighed a little more than 90 pounds. And she stayed right there with her daughter day and night, showing an amazing strength that inspired her family and her friends when they witnessed all this. Eventually, the little girl got better. And once she was home, people would ask her, how did you do it? How could anyone have the strength to do that? The young mother would smile warmly and say, she's my child. I love her more than life. I love her more than breathing. She needed me. She needed me as never before. I had to do it. I had to be there for her. That's love, right? It's not, I love you for what you can do for me, or I will love you as long as it's convenient. No, it's, I will love you unconditionally. I will love you no matter what. I will always, always be there for you. In the book, Crime and Punishment, any of you read that? An old one. Well, in Crime and Punishment, a young student murders 2 people for their money. And he rationalizes that this crime is okay by telling himself, first of all, that Napoleon killed thousands of people and he became a hero. Secondly, that his victims were not important people anyway, so they didn't really matter. And third, that he would use the money to further his career for the good of humanity. Most of the story is not about the crime that he committed, but about the punishment that he received. Punishment not from without, not going to jail or being arrested, but punishment from within. Guilt raged inside. His body, his mind, and his spirit were torn away at each other, and they wore him down. There's a young girl in the story whose name is Sonia, who loves this guy who is a murderer. This is a rare kind of love. It's not just sentiment. First of all, her love drives him to do what's right, to confess that he murdered these people. Then she tells him he must take the punishment and that this will ease his guilt and he will feel better about himself. So he does. He goes and he kisses the ground that he has stained with human blood. And he cries out his confession to everyone that will listen. And then finally, he is convicted of these crimes. And this book was set in Russia. So he is sent off to Siberia. Throughout his 9-year sentence in Siberia, she stays nearby. She keeps them both alive by scrounging whatever food she can find. Her love for him never quits. Crime and Punishment is about real love. It's about faith and values and undying loyalty. That's what real love is. I wonder, as young couples or older couples stand before the altar and light the candle in their wedding ceremonies if they understand the love, the kind of love that Ruth had for Naomi. Ruth was committed to her mother-in-law, even when there was nothing for her to gain and everything to lose. So these two ladies set out for Bethlehem, Naomi's hometown. Naomi's relatives greeted her fondly as they entered the city, but she told them, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara," which means bitter, for my life has been a bitter one. The only food that Naomi and Ruth had to eat after that was what was left over in the fields after the farmers had harvested. Back in those days, it was known as gleaning. Some of you have heard this term, right? And what happened was farmers were not allowed to go over and harvest the second time, harvest their field. They were to leave whatever was left over after that first time through for widows and poor people to go into the fields and collect. And so that's what they lived on. One day, a relative of Naomi's, a gentleman by the name of Boaz, noticed Ruth out there in the field, gathering grain. He talked to her a little bit and noticed that she was different from some of the other women that he'd met. And so Naomi played matchmaker and fixed her daughter-in-law up with Boaz. And they got married. After the wedding, Ruth had a son in Bethlehem. His son's name was Obed. And Obed, listening carefully now, Obed was the father of Jesse. And guess who Jesse was the father of? King David. And David was an ancestor of another baby boy born in Bethlehem. What do you think his name was? Yeah. Isn't it interesting that in the lineage of Jesus Christ, there was a Moabite woman who was named Ruth. She is there because of her loyalty to her mother-in-law. Do you see now why I'd say Jesus came from a long line of love? Because he did. And so do we. This is the heart of our message today. That kind of love is what the cross is all about. It's about a love that never quits, a love that never gives up, a love that never ever fails. It is agape love, love from the heart of God. It's not, I love you for what you can do for me, or I'll love you as long as it's convenient and you're doing what I think you need to do. It is, I will love you no matter what. I'll always be there for you. And you and I are the recipients of that kind of love. There's a red ribbon that extends from our lives all the way back to that cross. Over the past 2,000 plus years, folks just like us have continued to believe in that love. And they've passed that love on and down through the generations until it came to ours. Through plagues and famines, sometimes under terrible oppression, they did not let go of that love. And we are the recipients of it because of that undying love that continues to spread through the generations. Virginia Duran was a woman who was born in a migrant worker camp in Central California. Her father was in jail. Her mother couldn't afford to take care of her. There was a doctor in the area. The doctor's name was also Virginia, who made sure that there was enough food for her and for her mother. As Virginia grew and her family moved, she eventually lost contact with that kind doctor. And years later, when she was grown up, she was visiting Mexico and she saw a picture of a poor girl in the newspaper. At that moment, Virginia realized that if it hadn't been for that doctor many years ago, she could have ended up like the girl in the picture. When she she went home, she told her sister about this picture. She had decided that she wanted to do something to help her and other poor children and poor people. And so the two sisters traveled to Mexico and found a dusty village filled with migrant children. Many of the children's parents were unwed teenagers or alcoholics, people who just weren't doing what parents ought to do. And many of the children were malnourished and sick. Virginia and her sister helped as many of those children as they could. Sometimes they would have as many as 35 kids in their home under their care. As Virginia was taking care of those children, one day she remembered something that she had long forgotten. Dr. Virginia, who had once provided for her, told her that she, the doctor, had been rescued from a wealthy woman herself. That woman had also been saved from poverty by yet another woman who had been rescued by another, back 6 generations. All of these women lived in the West and were surrogate mothers for many, many kids who desperately needed to be loved. Interestingly, all of the women were named Virginia. The doctor told her one day a long time ago, she remembered. She told her these words: you're the 7th in a long line, and someday you'll do as much for someone else. Virginia Duran was in a long line of love. So was Jesus. So are you. So am I. Do you know about that kind of love? It is the kind of love that says, I love you, not because I need you, but just because you are you. I will always be there for you, no matter what. That, my friend, is God's love. Forever is in our heart and in our blood. We come from a long line of love. Amen.
Amen.